Unit 6 started off pretty interestingly. Right away, we dove into the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, where it talked about the definition of online dating, which it defined as using the internet to arrange to meet somebody and possibly begin a romantic relationship with them. I think most people nowadays are pretty familiar with the idea of online dating. Obviously, there's not much you can really learn about a person through, I guess, intimately learn about a person just from talking with them online. So the whole point is kind of to set yourself up for like an in-person meet. And I mean, every couple grows differently, so it's hard to say what is normal. There isn't necessarily a normal, but if I had to describe one, like it's kind of the idea of maybe you just use online dating as a chance to meet somebody. That's how you put a name to a face and you learn about some of their basic hobbies and set yourself up for a date. Like a chance to actually go out and get to know each other. We then watched kind of a comical video from the Data is Beautiful kind of group, and basically it's a little 2-minute visualization where they show like how couples generally have met over time, and it starts off kind of being evenly spread decently between couples meeting like either through family or school or friends, and this starts in about like the early 1930s, and as it goes on, the percentages change a little bit as certain groups kind of fall in and out of favor, like meeting in bars comes more popular and meeting at work, whereas like meeting in church or through school becomes less popular. But then by the time the 19 like late 80s, or I should say maybe the mid 20s hits, online kind of meeting becomes more popular, and you just watch it like start at the bottom of this graph where it's a tiny sliver, and then as it grows into like 2020, this part of the bar just explodes, and it eventually caps out at something like 60%. It looks like it just completely dominates the graph. It's so much bigger than anything else in there and anything else that like was ever on that graph. It's crazy. Next, we had a couple of readings to go through. The first was Vogel and McLean's Pew Research Summary, Key Findings About Online Dating in the U.S., which presents 12 different findings about online dating. And then, secondly, there's Thotham's article, Online Dating Statistics You Should Know, which is sponsored by eHarmony and presents 7 different findings about online dating as well. And these findings are all about different things like how age can impact a match, or how a bunch of people lie on their dating profiles, or like how your location matters. Um, there's also data about like how your match likeliness might change depending on like your race or your age, or um, maybe not your match likeliness, I should say, but like people who actually use the app. Um, and then just more statistics about like what apps are more common and what kind of people they're more common with and stuff like that. But after this, we were told to go to the discussion board for this assignment, and we were supposed to make a post in which we talked about 2 of the findings that surprised us the most and why, and then 2 that surprised us the least and why. And just going off that, I would say I was most surprised to learn that 53% of people lie on their online dating profiles, according to the article from Thotham. I know it's pretty common to think that people lie on there. They exaggerate their height, or like maybe how often they go to the gym or stuff like that. But 53% is a wild percent to me. That's the majority of people. Like at that point, if you look at a post, you can expect statistically that they are lying. And then I was also quite surprised to learn that online dating users are pretty divided over their whether they believe their experiences on dating platforms to have been like positive or negative overall, according to Vogel and McLean's research summary. I mean, I don't know. It's just wild to me that like a good amount of people don't even feel like they're making good progress on these dating apps, but they keep using them. Like, I mean, normally we think about logically, if something isn't working or you don't like how something is progressing, you kind of step away from it, try something else. But in these instances, like with online dating, people just kind of keep throwing themselves at it, even though they don't necessarily like it. And then talking about what I'm not surprised by, I was not surprised to learn that about half of those who use dating apps say they have come across someone who they think was trying to scam them, according to Vogel and McLean. This makes a lot of sense to me. You talk about dating apps, the amount of people who use them is so great. And, just by default, a lot of times those people are at least 18 years old. Maybe they have money that they're already spending on said app, or maybe they're just trying to really like connect with someone. And even if maybe there are signs that it's a scam, like they may be hesitant to really like kind of accept those signs just because they're trying to make a connection. So it doesn't surprise me that people would use these as an opportunity to try and scam others. And then I was also not surprised to learn that more men use online dating than women. Just anecdotally, I feel like I know a decent amount of guy friends who've used online dating at some point in their lives, whereas with women, I know it's less common and there's more of like maybe a stigma around it in general, you could say. I don't know if that's exactly the correct terminology, but kind of the idea that, I don't know, it's just more common, I guess, for guys to kind of want to find like a woman to date, whereas with women, it's more common to almost sort of, I don't know exactly how to word it, but the idea that like maybe being more proactive and finding someone to date is like more common for guys, you could say, than compared to women. But anyhow, that's all I had to say about assignment 1, and now it's time to move on to assignment number 2. Starting off with assignment number 2, we have a Wikipedia entry that talks about interpersonal attraction, which includes an explanation of the 4 psychological principles: propinquity, mere exposure, similarity, attraction, and complementarity. First off, we can think of interpersonal attraction as the attraction between people, which leads to a platonic or romantic relationship. It's kind of just like the starting point. Like before you really know what kind of relationship you have with a person, it's just a matter of getting to know them and meeting them, really. It's not just necessarily about like physical attraction or like having like a connection point with them or talking to them. It's more the idea that like you have a bond with them and there's kind of somewhere for that bond to go. Like it's gonna grow into something, maybe you'll be friends or maybe you'll be romantically involved. You don't know, it's just kind of a starting point. And then going through the other kind of little set of effects, the propinquity effect is the idea that the more we see and interact with a person, the more likely it is that they're going to become like someone we have a relationship with, or perhaps someone we're friends with. Just the idea that as we spend more time with them, the more likely we are to like them, I guess. This doesn't even necessarily apply to only physical interactions either. They found that this can exist over like internet interactions or just like texting as well. And then next is the mere exposure effect, which is very similar. It's the idea that the more you're exposed to something, the more you like it. The difference here is that this really applies to both objects and people. It's not just for people. It can really be for just about anything. And the next step was the similarity attraction effect. This is the idea that people who are more similar to each other are more likely to kind of get along and appreciate each other's company and want to spend more time with each other. And this can apply to like social interactions as well as like actual physical appearances. Like tall people might be more attracted to other tall people just because it is more like familiar to them. And people who are more like extroverted might also like more extroverted people just because it's kind of fun, the idea of finding someone that you get along with and that, is similar to yourself. And then finally was the complementarity sort of effect, which is the idea that people who kind of are not similar to each other get along as well. So for example, like people who can kind of cover each other's weaknesses. So like someone who's maybe like more kind of dominant in social interactions, like they don't, kind of take like offenses and they maybe act out. They might pair well with someone who is typically quieter and kind of let stuff roll over them just because one of them is kind of able to stand up in like a situation and do like the needed job when it comes around. It's really just the idea that regardless of what kind of situation that you're put in, that one of the two of you is going to kind of be able to manage it and kind of come out on top and be able to apply their skill set to handle the situation in the best way possible. After this, we did a few little bits of reading on different definitions about the term niche. The first calls it denoting of relating to products, services, or interests that appeal to a small, specialized section of the population. And another definition calls it a specialized market. Basically, it's just the idea, and it's a pretty common term, but niche is the idea that like it is really a more like specific subject matter, and it's not meant to apply to everyone. It's kind of known by a smaller group of people, and it's like kind of, I guess it maybe not belongs to them, but it's sort of, they know it and maybe many others don't. We then read an article from 2014 written by Abad Santo. This article was titled Why 1.5 million people are on a dating site called Farmers Only. And this article was pretty interesting because it talked about a series of different like dating sites that all exist that kind of belong to niche groups, relying on that definition we just talked about. So like, for example, Farmers Only. being a farmer is like a stressful job, and it dictates a lot of your, I guess, livelihood. And so it makes sense that a lot of times farmers hope to talk and like kind of be in relationships with their farmers because they want to kind of share that lifestyle. And then similarly, they talk about dating sites that are only for vegetarians and vegans who, want to date other vegetarians and vegans just because similarly they also feel like it is a lifestyle and they want to kind of be able to share that with someone rather than have to sit through or sift through the whole population of like omnivores and people who with other kind of diets before they could find someone who sort of supports them. Following this, we were tasked with finding a niche dating site of our own, which was pretty fun. The one that I found is called Taste Buds. What makes this site special is that it pairs people who have similar taste in music with each other. You could tell the site like what kind of artists and genres you're into, and then it will just pair you with people who have similar taste to you. I think the site really perfectly embodies the idea of like similarity attraction because you like it's pairing you directly with people who have similar tastes to you. Music is a very big hobby for some people, so it makes sense that people who share like taste in music would be at least a little interested in other people who have a similar taste, just because it does provide you, with something to talk about and like a conversation to have. Um, and this site also allows attraction to build based on the principle of propinquity, I would say. Although people aren't necessarily seeing each other face to face because it is like an online site, ultimately you do still have that freedom to kind of talk to each other and get to know each other, even if it's just through text, I would say. After making my post about that, though, that was everything I had for assignment 2. Going on to assignment number 3, it was time for me to go back to the posts that were made by my group mates in assignment number 1 and respond to their post with my 200 words where I, talk about compliments or critiques, or not critiques, but just connections and things like that. Starting off, I first went to Angelica's post where she talked about how she was surprised that when discussing reasons for people using when discussing the major reasons as to why people use dating apps, a lot of people said that a major reason was to have casual sex or to make new friends. And she said that she found this surprising that those wanting casual sex would be much higher compared to those wanting to make friends. Um, and then she said that she thought that the amount of people who were using these dating apps to find friends was not going to be very high. And she's surprised to find that it was as high as 22%. And then she was also surprised that age can impact finding a match because at 48, men have twice as many online pursuers as women. She said that she found this interesting because she never thought that at like a certain age the roles would reverse necessarily from men outnumbering women to the other way around. And then she was not very surprised by the findings that Tinder tops the list of dating sites or apps. The survey studies is particularly popular amongst adults under 30. She said she wasn't very surprised by this because it's a very well-known dating app, and it's just kind of pretty anecdotally popular from what we've seen, and I would agree with that. I feel like I see it everywhere. And then she also said that she was not surprised to find that 48% of online relationships end online, and she said that this actually makes sense if you think about it because, people who communicate online probably prefer to do most of their communication online, just generally. So it makes sense that these relationships that begin here would end here. And I would agree with that. I would say agree with pretty much just about everything she said here. I also feel like none of these findings that talked about like how relationships start and end or who uses Tinder were not that finding, just because I feel like I've heard about them enough in my own life. But yeah, in my own comment on her post, I would say that I could connect that a lot to my own life because I feel like I've heard kind of similar things to what she's heard about what's popular and what's not. And then I also just made sure to compliment her on how she presented her findings because she did a good job of formatting like the things that she found to be interesting and the things that she was not surprised by. It was just easy to read and it was split up well, which is just kind of a simple thing to do, but I appreciate it when it's done. So I just talked about it a little in my discussion response post. And then jumping over to Lucas, he said that he was surprised to learn that 3 in 10 adults say they have never used a dating site or app, which is the same kind of proportion to what was found in 2019, and that at 26, women have more online pursuers than men, whereas at age 48, men have twice as many as women, which is the same kind of fact that Angelica shared. And then Lucas said that the reason these two statistics were shocking is because he would have guessed A, that there'd be more growth in usage of dating apps from 2019, and B, same as Angelica, just that he assumed that the proportion of like men pursuing women and vice versa would not have shifted as much over time as it did. And then he also had two pieces of information that were not surprising to him. He said first off that he was not surprised to learn that Tinder is one of the most common dating apps for those under 30, and he was also not surprised to learn that online dating users are divided over whether the experience on these platforms have been positive or negative, just because he talks about how anecdotally he feels like he has seen Tinder being used often. And he says that he feels like he can understand the positive and negative experiences on the app, as dating can be like just a difficult experience in general, so he wasn't surprised by that. Which is kind of interesting because that's actually the opposite end of the spectrum that I decided to put that factoid on. I did find that to be surprising. So in my post, I just kind of talked about how I thought that was interesting that we had different views on that. But then I also commented on how, I agree with him that it is kind of surprising that the proportion of people who use dating apps hasn't really changed over the last 5 years. Just because I feel like, internet, by the year 2019, the internet's been around for long enough that most people are familiar with it. But even so, just going into the future, I would expect it to become more popular, I guess, So that was kind of interesting to learn. And I was just kind of happy to read his post and kind of figure out what he thinks about all that and how it, I guess, changes and doesn't change and what it all means and just stuff like that. So that was a cool read and I appreciated it. And I made sure to let him know in my comment that I was glad to kind of hear about his insight. That was the end of assignment number 3, though, for today. So it was time to move on to assignment number 4. Assignment number 4 this week started off pretty strong. Right away, we were given 8 different kind of sets of readings to do. Some were articles, some were abstracts from papers, some were tweets, and they all talked about the idea of interpersonal aggression, or in other words, like the aggression that kind of happens between people. These articles were pretty interesting. They talked about different forms of aggression and where it comes from and why people do it. Some articles talked about historical examples of aggression, like kind of famous examples we've seen or how it's changed over time. And then some articles also mentioned cyberbullying and how that's kind of grown in recent years. And just the idea that, it can happen in a digital space because we put so much of our lives on like a digital space. We post about our friends and our families and our activities. It does kind of make sense that bullying would shift there too, just because it is so much easier to reach people and to look into their lives. So, for these people who bully like this, it's so much easier to just kind of tap right into all this content and then wave it over people. Even though it's so wrong to do it and it's so hurtful, it becomes easier too, in a sense. Then we were given the option to either listen to the first 25 minutes of the NPR's 2015 episode. If you don't have anything nice to say it in all caps. And in this episode, Lindy West confronted her cyberbully live on air. Or we were given the option to read Francie Deep's 2014 article, Confronting My Cyberbully 13 Years Later. I decided to listen to the talk from Lindy West where she confronts her cyberbully live on air. I chose to listen to Lindy West's story about confronting her online troll live because I just thought, because it was presented as like an audio recording, just kind of on like a meta level, that I thought it would be more interesting to listen to, just because, that way there's kind of a chance to get more emotion into it. And I thought that would be kind of just more eye-opening as to how it like affects these people and how it makes them feel. You can read about it as like a text, but actually listening to these people talk about these horrible experiences is really like more of just a powerful kind of way to move through it all. And then in terms of discussing which social psychological principle was kind of underlying like the cyberbully's aggression, I believe that the frustration aggression theory from the Smith and Mackey reading was the most applicable. And this theory kind of talked about the idea that a lot of times our aggression with people kind of stems from like a frustration that we have that also is kind of pointed at that person. And for example, in this talk, the cyberbully actually specifically mentioned how they felt frustrated that overweight women like Lindy West seem to have an easier time feeling comfortable in their own skin. Sometimes, not all the times, but oftentimes they're able to kind of find peace in that. and this made the cyberbully, who was also an overweight individual, kind of feel upset just because they were having a very hard time accepting themselves, and seeing other people kind of go about it and successfully pull that off made them feel more frustrated and kind of empty, which led to them acting out aggressively. And then in terms of talking about what personality traits might underlie the cyberbully's aggression, and these were talked about in Gross's article, Pashler's tweet, Grant's tweet, Buckles et al.'s abstract, and Lopez and Yu's abstract. I said that I believe that that sadism is a commonly found personality trait amongst people who will like troll in these online spaces and harass people. I also said that, these articles talk about psychopathy and narcissism are referenced, and I think those definitely could be kind of showing up here. Just kind of all these traits that are about hurting other people and like negatively affecting them, even if maybe they have really no effect on our own lives, or they don't, like, it's not even worth it to like attack these people just because they don't affect us, getting it in our heads that for whatever reason, like, there's some kind of conquest we need to go on to like hurt these other people, even if we don't really know them and we don't really know their stories. And then for part number 4, we referred back to definitions that we read in some more of the articles to determine if the aggression was hostile or instrumental. And I said that the cyberbullying that we saw here seemed to be more of like hostile aggression, considering that they had no real goal in their aggression. It wasn't like they were trying to like get Lindy to like take her podcast down or to stop doing anything or to like hurt herself. It was just a matter of feeling frustrated and angry and kind of lashing out back at her. Also in the definition for hostile aggression, we see that emotional arousal is cited as being something that makes hostile aggression more likely to appear. And we know that the cyberbully was emotionally aroused because they stated that they felt like jealous and angry and just kind of very frustrated when they acted out. So I definitely feel confident in like a hostile aggression type of kind of classification, just because a lot of the sort of symptomology is there for it. And then finally, kind of moving away from the podcast, we had a question that asks us, is the type of bullying and trolling that we see on the internet a new phenomenon, or has it been around since the days of Kierkegaard and Einstein? And that refers back to some of the readings that we did for this bit too. And I said that pretty much all the articles that we read provide evidence that like hecklers and just rude people have been around for a long time. And I mean, the internet has certainly provided them with a new platform and a new set of tools and a new way of like just being rude like this. But that, I mean, really, people who wanted to act this way always had their own voice. They could always go and say these mean things. It's just that now it's almost easier to do it and even to stay anonymous while doing it, kind of tweeting or just posting horrible things about other people. It's not been made worse by the internet per se. That's the end of assignment number 4, though. Moving into assignment number 5, we have another weekly meet with our chat group. And then prior to this meet, we read another kind of series of things. We read an article talking about how to stop bullies, an abstract titled Tweetment Effects on the Tweeted Experimentally Reducing Racist Harassment. And then we talked more about Kal Penn, who raised money for Syrian refugees in response to a troll that he had received. We read another article titled Cyberbullying Comparatively Rare Than Traditional Bullying, which was interesting because it talked a lot about how even though we like to think that cyberbullying is a lot more common nowadays, the fact is that like physical in-person bullying is actually still more common. And in the study, they talked to 110,000 different teenagers, so they had a very big sample size, which was pretty interesting. And then there was a summary of Pew Research survey titled 4 Major Themes About the Future of the Online Social Climate. And then we had a final abstract to read from Cunningham et al.'s 2015 article, Modeling the Anti-Cyberbullying Preferences of University Students. Just to kind of generally go over these articles, the theme that sort of ran through them all was the idea that bullying is something that's been around for a long time. We've seen it between children and we've seen it between adolescents and young adults. The idea of creating an in-group and an out-group is something that, most psychological students with that kind of background should be familiar with the idea. But, I mean, we see it happen all the time in all different kinds of people. And as, we move into this sort of online era, it takes on maybe sort of a new form as you can kind of get away with like doing it and not necessarily being known or being caught. But that even in this sense, there are still ways to like counteract it. Like there are moral ways to sort of move beyond it, and there are kind of like physical ways that you can, reach out to people and get help and resources to combat even these online bullies. There's always ways that you can sort of circumvent these things. First off, we started in our group chat by discussing some of the methods we learned about that have been tried to stop cyberbullying. So for the Bazelon article, we discussed how people would harass harassers and consequences such as banning people on like online platforms were common, and how perhaps like before certain comments are made that include like inappropriate language, like a pop-up could be made to kind of ask like these posters like, are you sure you want to say this? This seems rude or offensive. Like, do you really want to go ahead with this? For Munger, we talked about how the reading suggested that people who harass others online could be willing to listen to people they view as having more authority, kind of bowing down to like a bigger sort of power figure. So like having more of an online presence could be a good way to stop sort of that online cyberbullying, just because there's someone there kind of holding the hammer over them who maybe they would have more respect for. And then the Kal Penn reading was also interesting because he turned kind of the negativity of cyberbullying around him into a positive by actually working to raise money for Syrian refugees. For a little background to that Kal Penn story, he initially talked about he was unhappy with an executive action that had been signed to temporarily ban refugees into the United States. And he talked about how it was not right for families to be torn apart and for all this strife to be kind of caused. And then on his original post, someone commented that they believed that Kal Penn didn't belong in the country, that they were a joke because he was the son of immigrants, I should say. And this was just, it got kind of ugly with people saying different things such as that. And then in response to this hateful comment and the others he had received, Kal Penn tried to really rally people. He talked about how, being hateful doesn't help anyone and we can be better than that. And so he started a campaign to raise enough money to kind of go to Syrian refugees to support them and help them. The money was actually sent off to the International Rescue Committee to help all these refugees. So that was just a chance for him to kind of really turn a negative into a positive and really do something instead of sort of sitting around and kind of pointing the finger and just being mad at people. Going back then to our group work, we talked about how in the Reynolds article, they talked about how cyberbullying is less common than most people believe, and how in the article they talked about how preventing cyberbullying is not as important as actually getting to the root cause of bullying as a whole and trying to prevent that. Because, if you really think about it, cyberbullying is kind of like more of an offshoot. So if we want to stop it, we kind of have to stop the entire thing rather than just focusing on this one aspect of it. It's really a matter of changing like how people think and what they think is correct rather than just trying to like stop cyberbullying in its tracks. And then after we read the Pew article, we talked about that, and we noted how AI and human solutions can be used to kind of look at inappropriate behavior that has not been caught by people. So like, having like a computer that's trained on, like inappropriate dialogue and discourse, and help like having it pull out inappropriate messages so that like a human reviewer can come through and look at it and potentially shut down any kind of bullying that's happened, rather than having like, a million people sitting at computers everywhere to read all these different chat messages, which is just not realistic. This reading talked about how more oversight and like effective countermeasures have to be put in place to stop the spread of negativity, just because there's enough of it now that we need to be more kind of proactive in our behavior against it. The Cunningham article that we read was also pretty powerful because it related back to the Munger and Penn reading, and that there was an idea that you can really rally behind people if you respect them more. So, like looking at someone who is able to kind of keep their cool and not get mad over, hateful comments is a pretty good thing to do, and it's an opportunity to sort of support them because, we know they do good things, and we know that supporting them is going to go on to help people, and that's really a good way to stop bullying. Like kind of ignoring the bad and supporting the good is definitely one way to do it. We also talked about how we thought that being able to like report people anonymously online would be beneficial because it would prevent kind of shaming of people. Like sometimes if you're the person to stand up or say something, then you kind of get a bad reputation as being like a rat or a snitch or anything. So having an opportunity to do it anonymously is definitely a good way to kind of protect these people and give them a chance to stand up without maybe getting in any kind of trouble for it. And then when it came time for us as a group to determine which methods we believed would be best for addressing the issue of cyberbullying, we said that, what we said earlier, like using AI as a moderator would definitely be a good tool. And then like presenting real life consequences and accountability, rather than just like maybe you get banned from a website or banned from a video game, actually maybe getting in like some kind of trouble, like getting fined or being talked to, or, having to take like a class maybe or watch a video could be a good way to kind of help someone maybe grow out of their negative habits while promoting empathy. We said that it wasn't very effective to just have like a report that goes through online and then to not follow up on it at all, because we saw in the readings how it was explained that this doesn't really work that much, just because if you kind of kick someone out of like a service or like a space without explaining why their bullying is inappropriate, then they don't really learn from that. They just kind of wait until they're allowed back or they find somewhere else to go and do it, and it really doesn't solve the problem. Then as a group, we came together to design an effective system to deter, if not eliminate, cyberbullying. And kind of talking about what we said earlier, as a group, we said that designing a system that uses like AI monitoring would be good, and then holding people accountable, and then like educating these people if it's found that they are bullying would be good. Just finding these people who are doing this bullying by the use of AI, and then actually educating them on the material to make sure they realize how harmful it is, what they're really doing, and why it's important that they kind of grow out of it and start to treat people correctly. That was the end of our discussion though, so we said our goodbyes, and that was the end of assignment 5. Moving into assignment number 6, right away we looked at our course review sheet. I made sure to fill in the old week's worth of content, and then right away Unit 6 was asking about explaining what interpersonal attraction is and how similarity attraction might underlie the success of online dating apps. And I just was talking about how interpersonal attraction is considered to be like the attraction that people have for each other, which eventually leads to some kind of like a relationship, be it romantic or friendly. This kind of attraction could be considered related to like how much a person likes or dislikes another person, kind of the idea of whether or not we want to spend time with them. And then I said that similarity attraction is the simple notion that people generally like other people they consider themselves to be similar to. If we see someone that reminds us of ourselves, that might, just that feeling of familiarity might be comforting to us. Online dating sites capitalize on this feature by allowing people of similar backgrounds to kind of interact with each other more easily. Like when we talked about the niche dating sites, like finding someone who has a similar hobby to yourself. And this definitely helps online dating because it's so easy to kind of connect with people who, I guess, remind you of yourself. And then going on as well to explain what interpersonal aggression is and how interpersonal aggression might underlie the phenomena of online bullying and trolling. I just said that interpersonal aggression is when a person is aggressive towards another person, usually either by like saying intense things or by physically acting in intense ways. Cyberbullying could also be seen as another outlet for interpersonal aggression, as people who use online communication to get mad or like annoy other people, and then use the internet to get into contact with them. They just say that like intense and aggressive things to them as a means of like kind of getting their frustration out or reacting. And I just felt strongly that like interpersonal aggression definitely underlies like a lot of bullying, just because it is kind of the feeling that, bullying is a very one-to-one thing. Like person A bullies person B. And I think this kind of isn't really that random. A lot of times it's because there's just a dislike for the other person. And so this kind of interpersonal aggression is where this bullying stems from. But anywho, going on to the term project work, I decided to figure out how I wanted to use all my different tools. So I figured out like where I wanted my podcast to go, and I figured out how I wanted to record it and edit it. And then I made sure to get my journal all caught up to where I am this week. So just like taking notes on all the stuff that I've been doing for like all my different daily little bits of class. And then I took those kind of my notes about what I've done and a screenshot of my work that I've done so far, of at least 6 possible sources. Or sorry, actually, I'm mistaken. I didn't use any sources. That was for the deep dive project. But for my own whole course option, I did want to actually look at like examples of other podcasts and how people have kind of figured that sort of stuff out and worked it together to see what I like and what I don't like, to get an example of what I want to do. But then I took my description of the work that I've done so far and I put it into my post for this week's kind of project post, and I put my course review sheet in there together. And then that was the end of Unit 6.